All right, welcome to the SnydeReport. I am your host, Gary Snyder. My guest today is former Congressman and now Democrat candidate for governor of Florida, David Jolly. David, welcome.
Hey, thank you, Gary. Great to be with you.
Well, it's great to have you. I guess my first question, let's do this first. Why don't you just take a few minutes and tell people about yourself?
Yeah, so David Jolly, former Republican member of Congress from the state of Florida, now a Democratic candidate for governor, but in between spent about 6 years as an independent, which really informed a lot of my politics. And I love kind of the independent, the being untethered kind of from reflexive partisan dogma sometimes as we try to tackle big problems. And so, look, I think my values all along have remained the same. When I was a Republican in Congress, I supported marriage equality, gun violence prevention, climate science, campaign finance reform, all the things that made Republicans not want me, but Democrats didn't need me. And in the independent space, I got to kind of exercise that freedom of thought. But I am a proud Florida Democrat right now, and I know a lot of people are saying, wait a minute, the Democratic brand is kind of beaten up. I see the values in the Democratic Party that I've really held all along, even as my time as a Republican, which are some party has to fight for an economy for all people, has to fight for a government that responsibly administers and efficiently administers services to our seniors, to our veterans, investments in public education to provide excellence in education for everybody, provides for safe communities. So a party that provides for an economy for all people and a government that actually serves its people. And the final value, the third one I see, is a party and hopefully a state of Florida that lifts everybody up, that gives respect and dignity to everybody, regardless of where you were born, the color of your skin, who you love, who you worship. Those are kind of the values that I see. And from values, then, we derive policies to attack big problems. I'm not a perennial candidate, right? I have not been a candidate in 10 years. My wife and I have two young children, 6 and 4. I believe we're in the midst of a national change environment. In Florida, we have an affordability crisis that knows no walk of life or no party registration, right? The affordability crisis hits you whether you're a Republican, a Democrat, or an independent. For my wife and I with a 6 and 4-year-old kid, it's a lived experience. And I think now is the time in the state of Florida, if we are going to see change, this is the best shot we've had in 30 years. And this race kind of sets up the question, do we want change or do we want more of the same? And we're building a coalition around change.
I too ran as a Republican back I was a Republican back in the late 2008, 2009. My journey to being an independent, first it was a libertarian, then an independent, then a Democrat. It was personal. It had to do with job loss and having 6 children in the house with no job. It was extremely personal for me.
Sure.
Tell us about your personal journey from being a Republican congressman during the Tea Party era to where you are now as a Democrat.
Yeah, so look, I was always kind of a Bush 41 Republican, registering at 18 as a Republican, a lifelong Republican, but a Bush 41 Republican. And so lived through the changes from the party being about less government to then really with the Tea Party about no government. And then under Donald Trump, government's the enemy. And that was a journey that I wasn't willing to take. And so, the big battles for me, I was a bit of a career staffer on Capitol Hill. I worked for my predecessor in Congress. And when the Tea Party was taking the position of just shutting government down, I think we have to accept responsibility, even if it means some political losses, to keep the government open, to responsibly administer the government. And then as the Trump era emerged was my real breaking point. But I think the personal stuff for me was when I was in Congress, I gave a floor speech one time where I got really angry because so often we would have the votes needed if we would just drop the R's and D's. There were enough people to vote for legislation that we all agreed we needed, but because of the R's and D's next to our names, we couldn't. And so one was after the Pulse nightclub. The real issue was, should someone on the no-fly list be able to purchase a firearm? Well, if someone's on the no-fly list because they're a risk, probably they shouldn't be able to purchase a firearm without an extensive background check. But Republicans were making the right libertarian argument that, wait, there's no due process for the no-fly list. And so without due process, you can't deny the purchase of a firearm. Democrats just wanted an outright prohibition. And I said, well, why don't we just put due process into this bill? And we'll have the votes. And I negotiated the votes. We had over 218 votes. But then Democrats said, we're not going to work with Jolly because he's a Republican in a tough district. Republicans said, we're not going to work with you on this because the gun lobby doesn't want to. I went on CNN and someone said, Jolly, you're making too much sense. And it wasn't that I was making sense. It's just that that's where people were, right? If you're a risk to the country, you should be entitled to due process. But if it's determined you're a risk, you shouldn't be able to buy a firearm. Similar issues, look, marriage equality. I'm a person of faith. I grew up in a preacher's home. I can choose whatever my faith teachings are. But at the same time, we have to celebrate the freedom and liberty the Constitution provides for everybody. Now, I don't have a personal or faith conviction about the LGBTQ plus community. I have members in our own family from the LGBTQ plus community. But my point was, listen, we have to provide constitutional protections to everybody. And to my side of the aisle, a part of the freedom we protect is for the faith community to evangelize their teachings just as much as we protect the liberty of someone else to hold to different teachings. And those moments to me were part of the heartbreak of reflexive partisanship. And so I don't know how, there are a lot of ways to get past reflexive partisanship. You can look at multi-party democracies and realize they have greater voter participation, greater voter turnout, greater consensus in policy making. That's not America's system right now. Maybe it should be in the future. But I do see in today's Democratic Party the opportunity to kind of attack some of this nonsense with a values-driven approach to solving people's problems.
In 2022, I ran for Congress. I ran against one of the worst human beings possible in Jim Banks, the now U.S. Senator. I had a certain amount of Democrats that would not vote for me simply because I used to be a Republican. And I'm sure you're going to run into that in Florida. So how do you reconcile that with Democrats that say, no, he used to be a Republican. I want ideological purity, not a former Republican. And interviewing Matt Kinzinger a while back, I think he summed it up. Do you want ideological purity or do you want to win?
Yeah, look, that's a lot of it. But I also would say I defend the Democratic Party's values. Where some Democratic leaders today are looking at 2024 and saying, oh, we have to change. No, we have to amplify our values, but we have to just meet voters where they are at. In Florida in 2026, that's an affordability crisis where homeowners insurance and property taxes are creating a crisis for everybody. That's where voters are, right? If we chase other issues, it's not to abandon our principles on other issues, but if we chase other issues, we're losing. Because what voters want to know is, how are we applying democratic values to solving the affordability crisis in the state of Florida? The other side of the aisle want to make this race about Donald Trump and socialism and all that stuff they throw out. If we're in that conversation, we're losing. So part of it is using democratic values to meet voters where they're at. But I would also tell you this. This is a very different, at least in Florida, a very different democratic environment right now. I call it a very rational environment. I contrast it with 2018, where we saw almost this circular firing squad of ideology, right? Where should we be? Left, middle, super middle, whatever that was. That conversation really isn't being had. This environment knows if we can coalesce around a coalition, not just a candidate, a coalition that represents democratic values, then we can have a coalition that wins. And when we win, we get to invest in public education. We get to look at gun safety legislation in the state of Florida. We get to have a state catastrophic fund to provide immediate insurance relief to homeowners. We get to invest in the environment and climate resiliency. We get to clean out all of Governor DeSantis' appointees that don't believe in data or math or science and actually return leaders into those spots with true subject matter expertise, believing in academic diversity. That's what happens when this coalition wins. But it starts with saying the Democratic Party's values are exactly right for the future of the state and for the country, defending those every step of the way.
David, can you hold through a quick break?
You bet. Thank you, Gary.
You're listening to the Snide Report with Gary Snyder. We'll be right back. All right, this is the part of the Snide Report where we thank our sponsors, and we have a growing list. So let's start with Robin Winston. Robin has been there when we first sent out our first email, 147 subscribers. We're now over 108,000. So thank you, Robin Winston, and helping us get the podcast going in the right direction. Next up is our good friend, former Congresswoman Jill Long Thompson. Her book, Across the Aisle, Why Bipartisanship Works for America. Get that anywhere you buy your books. Also, former two-term governor, two-term U.S. Senator Evan Bayh. Evan has been a sponsor of the newsletter, now jumps on board with the podcast. Congressman Andre Carson. Congressman Carson has been there from the start. We're glad to have him over here on the newsletter now. He needs your help to win re-election next year, so make sure you support Congressman Carson. Next up, State Representative Cherish Pryor. Cherish has been there from the start on the newsletter, joining us on the podcast now. So is State Senator Greg Taylor. I want to thank Senator Taylor for all of his support through the years. Next, we have a couple of new sponsors. First up is Indiana Citizen. You want to check out their new project, One Heartbeat Away. Do Christian nationalists have an agenda for Indiana? You know, all you have to do is look at the lieutenant governorship and you can see right away that they do. So thank you, Indiana Citizen. Next up is Jump Laundry. You can visit them at jumplaundry.com. They have home pickup. They do your dry cleaning, wash and fold with, I might add, no judgments, and next day service. So if you're in a crunch for time, you don't want to do your own laundry, get a hold of Jump Laundry at jumplaundry.com or at 317-740-5011. And they will take care of all of your laundry needs. Welcome back to the I got my own show wrong. Welcome back to the SnydeReport with Gary Snyder. My guest today is former Republican Congressman and now Democrat candidate for governor of Florida, David Jolly. David, you talked about affordability. We do this podcast, you can see behind me, with my kitchen table in the background because, you know, people right now are struggling to make ends meet, especially with tariffs putting a price on everything. You talk about property taxes and insurance. I had a friend that told me that I was complaining because I was paying $3,000 a year for my homeowner's insurance. She goes, I'm paying almost $20,000 down in Florida. So talk to me a little bit about how you make kitchen table issues, you know, how you talk to the working middle class that say, we're here to help you make your life easier.
Yeah, one, by actually offering real solutions. It is one thing, as Bill Clinton said, I feel your pain, right? Any politician is pretty good at saying, I understand your problems. Maybe, not every politician, right? My opponent in this race has already said, Florida just needs more of the same. That's his response to when I got into the race. And so I don't think that's the case, right? If you're suffering from an affordability crisis in Florida where access to housing, whether you're a home buyer or a renter, is unaffordable because the property insurance market has collapsed in Florida, or because property taxes are so high, or you're struggling because your car insurance is up because of the risk of hurricanes and other supply chain issues, or if you can't afford to live near your job because housing's too expensive, so you live an hour away, but you have to sit in traffic for 2 hours while people who can afford to pay $10 on a toll road get to zoom right past you, or because we've abandoned public education and you were given a voucher program for your private school, but now that private school is unregulated by the government and charging you 10 grand for your kid to go. You can't afford that. Utilities are spiking because we won't allow renewable and clean energies that could reduce costs for consumers to come in. That is more of the same. That is more of the same. And people understand that regardless of what community you live in, regardless of whether you were born here or you might have immigrated here or you retired here from Indiana, right? Everybody actually feels that. And so we get that. Now, how do we solve it? I won't belabor it, but I'm in a very post-ideological space. On property insurance in natural disaster states, it's not coming back. It's collapsed. So we need a state catastrophic fund to remove hurricane coverage from the private market, put it into a state fund. It could reduce property insurance in some cases by 50 or 60%. That impacts every family, whatever you're paying. On property taxes, 20 years ago, we created Save Our Homes to make sure longtime homeowners could stay in their homes. They didn't get priced out by taxes. Now we have an inverted problem. First-time home buyers can't afford to get in. So we need major exemptions for first-time home buyers to make home buying more accessible. We need more roads for everybody, not just for the people who can pay tolls. We need to invest in public education. All of those things improve the quality of life for Floridians. Now, Gary, get this. Nothing I just talked about had to do with Donald Trump. Nothing. Nothing. This is a governor's race about meeting voters where they're at with their immediate concerns and saying, we are going to tackle this together as a coalition. The other side will want to make this about the President of the United States. This is a governor's race. It's not about the president. If it falls into a race about the president, that gets very hard in Florida for a Democratic nominee to win. But if we laser focus on affordability and actual problems that people have, we end up in a scenario where Andy Beshear wins Kentucky, where Steve Bullock wins Montana, where David Jolly wins Florida. That's what this race is going to shape up like.
You mentioned public education. Just two more questions for you.
Sure.
You mentioned public education. Here in Indiana, we have unlimited vouchers. That means that if Elon Musk were to move to Indiana, we would pay for vouchers for his 14 kids to go to private schools. How is that destroying public education in Florida?
Yeah, so public education in Florida has been starved. Teachers are maybe the lowest paid in the entire country. We also are not investing in our facilities and in our infrastructure. Teachers that 10 years ago were doing one job now have 3 jobs to do. But excellence in public education in Florida exists out of the sheer will and commitment of incredible teachers and administrators who make it happen. We just went to universal vouchers a year ago, and Republicans gave away the plot, right? It used to be about helping families in need. In our first year of universal vouchers, 70% of families who received them were already enrolled in the private school that they applied the voucher to.
And now they can't afford them because they've raised the tuition.
Because they raised the tuition. And so here's the biggest problem. The biggest problem is those schools do not have to meet the same standards or provide the same services. If your first grade kid can't read and gets held back in a voucher school, they're not required in Florida to provide an IEP. In fact, they can just disenroll that student, send them back to a public school after having accepted the voucher money for that kid. And so I think the way we fix it, look, choice is here to stay, right? But we lead with saying we are going to invest incredible amounts in public education. I want Florida to have the best public education system in the world. Let's not try to get a 3% pay raise for teachers. Let's try to get to 30%. Let's let teachers teach, get the politicians out of the classroom, have more community public schools in more neighborhoods with more teachers who are paid more. But when it comes to the voucher system, let's go back to means testing, so it's only for families who need it. Right. Let's put either a cap on the rate of tuition increases, or say if you accept a voucher for a kid, that's it. You don't get to charge any more to that family. But also, you have to meet the same standards and provide the same services that our public schools do. Because if we get to that, then we're in an environment where we can look at public and private schools and say, public and private schools are education partners of Florida's families. And as a state, we're going to put the same rules on all of our education partners. And if that's met, and the program is actually means tested, then maybe we've reached where choice should have been all along. But right now, school choice in Florida under Republican leadership is a false choice. It's just a false choice. It's not a real choice.
Last question for you. You mentioned Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear. I actually interviewed him yesterday. And when speaking with him, he said one of the reasons he thinks he has done so well in Kentucky is that he knows how to talk to his constituents. He doesn't talk to them like a professor talking to a student. It's not food insecurity, it's hunger. It's addiction. As ugly as that sounds, it's addiction when it comes to, fentanyl and things like that. So how do you talk and what do you say to residents of Florida to get them to vote for you and to make them understand that you are one of them and not some unapproachable candidate?
Yeah, I think that's very important. And particularly, let's look at it through the Democratic Party's current state. We have to be Democrats that can go into communities where Democrats haven't gone before, at least not for a long time, and have conversations. That means, as a person of faith, I need to go into faith communities and say, I'm running as a Democrat because I believe in certain values. I think the economy should work for all people. We should provide services for the homeless, for our seniors, for our veterans. We should invest in public education for everyone. We should give dignity and respect to all of God's children, regardless of the color of their skin, who they love, who they worship, what faith they choose. So we have to have conversations in those communities. We need to go in the ag communities and say, I understand your labor markets are tight. They're tight because of the immigration policies of our Republican leaders in Tallahassee and in Washington. We need to go to gun owners and say, I know gun owners aren't the problem, but our gun laws are. And if we strengthen gun violence prevention legislation in Florida, we'll protect your kids, just like we'll protect our kids. We're actually all trying to achieve the same Florida that is good for all of us, a strong economy, a government that works, that protects our kids. And we have to be Democrats that also go into communities in Florida, for instance, deep into some of our immigrant communities and condemn socialism and communism. And be Democrats that say capitalism provides the greatest opportunity, but it's got to be fair capitalism. And we're the party that's going to fight for capitalism to work for everybody and to lift people up and to realize that when it breaks down and it's not working for you, we will ensure that you have access to health care and to food security, right? And you have access to basic services that you need. Those are just talking about our values in communities where I don't think we've spoken about them before. And to give credit to Governor Beshear, using language we should have been using all along. And this goes back to where I think the Democratic Party is ready to be that party. I really do. Every state's different, right? I think one of the ways back for Democrats nationally is through governorship runs this next cycle. But Florida's different than Michigan. It's different from Texas, different from California, different from Kentucky. And so we need Democratic leaders that understand that and can speak the language that resonates in their home state.
Anything you wanted to cover that I did not ask you?
I would just ask people to believe that change is possible this cycle in Florida. I mean, in past cycles, it's been written off, and probably rightly so. But I can tell you, as someone who's been in Florida politics for as long as I have, a Democratic candidate for governor can win in Florida in 26. And if we do that, when we do that, not only will it be a national story, we will have rebalanced kind of the balance of power politically, probably across the country. All of a sudden, the road to the White House runs through Florida in 2028 again. The White House becomes more competitive. And whether you're a Democrat, an independent, or a Republican, I would ask you to just look past the party label and say, do you want change or do you want more of the same? Because so many things are not working for you right now. And in Florida, if we keep going in this direction, we're going to get more of the same. But this is an opportunity for change.
We have about 100,000 people that read our newsletter each day. Probably tens of thousands that will watch this podcast. I had you on because I think what happens in Florida is important to Indiana because it does set the stage for 26 and 28. So how can Hoosiers, people watching this, how can they help your campaign?
You know I'm a candidate if I have a website. Go to davidjolly.com. And I mean it. Look, if you can support us financially, please do. Please consider doing that. If it's a matter of signing up as a volunteer, I'm sure down the road we could use you for a phone bank. Or if you happen to be in Florida, you could knock on a few doors or whatever it might be. But truly, the first thing I'm asking people to do is believe. Just believe. And the great thing about it is most people, if you really do some soul searching, you already do. You know change is possible. If you didn't believe change is possible, you would have already thrown up your hands. You wouldn't be listening to this podcast. You wouldn't be engaged politically. You believe change is possible, so let's go make it happen.
If you're just joining us, we are wrapping up with Democrat candidate for governor of Florida, David Jolly. I ask you to hit somewhere down here, there's a subscribe button, hit it, leave a comment, like this podcast. I am Gary Snyder, he is not, he is David Jolly. This is the SnydeReport, and we are out.